Throughout history, every civilization, each in its own unique era and corner of the globe, has left its mark on the fabric of time. These marks are more than just monuments or artifacts, they are impossible masonry that declares a high state of civilization. They're fragments of us in a time when we thrived. Yet the mainstream dismisses them as rude handiwork of so-called uncivilized peoples, irrelevant relics of a wilder time. Now, if you're new to my channel, then I'll go ahead and re-establish what others may know. It's a simple task. Think for yourself. Welcome to episode 3 of Don't You Think It's Funny?, where we discuss the unknown Great Wall of Texas. The topics I've covered, as well as the ones within this video, are largely considered a case-closed study. Often, in my opinion, they are slammed shut in a way that convinces the public to look no further. They figured it out. It's absolutely nothing interesting. When this is stated, I immediately know there's something probably interesting, that there's more to the story. The perfect example of this is the well-known discovery in Rockwall, Texas, which we will get into first. Then we will read an article I found pertaining to a similar discovery that was found in Milano, Texas, which says it resembles the Great Wall of China. If you don't know about what's in Rockwall, then can you take a guess? One guess. Yes. Nothing interesting, so don't look into it. No, there's a rock wall, of course. The name is derived from a pre-Columbian wall running beneath its town square. Mainstream archaeology labels the rock wall formation as a natural phenomenon, or at best, a creation of simple hunter and gatherer tribes. That'll be what you get from a quick Google search, which barely scratches the surface. As I do, I search the archives of our past newspapers. Like most closed case files, there's bold claims and utters something far more complex than a natural rock formation. It is another ripped out page of our history that is, shall I say, kind of funny. Uncovered in 1852, this rock wall sparked fascinating debates until the religion of scientism stepped in and tried to ruin the fun in 1909. Sidney Page published an article in Science magazine claiming to debunk all the theories by explaining the wall as a natural geological formation. Page described the structure as sandstone dikes that formed naturally through sedimentation, fracturing, and mineral cementation. He said these dikes sometimes weather in ways that resemble masonry, creating the illusion of deliberate construction. He also argued that this phenomenon wasn't unique to Rockwall and could be found in other parts of the world. Okay, maybe that's true, but what does it look like to you? Did Page's explanation close this case for you? If not, let's dig into some articles written by people like us. On Monday, August 5th, 1907, just 2 years before Poo Poo Party Page dismissed the claims, Miss M.L. Lamoro of the Texas Anthropological and Archaeological Society said the wall was older than similar discoveries in Egypt. She reported that the slab stones unearthed were of uniform size, symmetrical shapes, and resembled the cement bricks of ancient Egypt. But wait. Why wasn't that in Science magazine? She's in the Club of Sciences. In another article titled Great Discovery, the writer suggested that scientists might determine this country was inhabited as anciently as Egypt or southern Asia. They described the wall as being 40 feet high, with its top just 3 feet below the ground. The article even asked, "It is no more unreasonable to suppose that this country was inhabited in the early days than the Eastern Hemisphere was. In fact, it is more reasonable to believe that it was. But what became of the people? Why do we not find more evidence of their abode? The only inference is that this continent was subjected to great surface and climatic changes, and their cities and towers were more completely obliterated and covered up. Now why? Oh, why, people? Why can't we do this kind of journalism anymore? What's fascinating is that these theories sound just like the ones we're still piecing together today, the erasers of civilizations. But how and when did it happen? Even after Page's claims, the truthers of our past didn't give up on the Rockwall mystery. In 1936, an article reported ancient bones found at the site. It also mentioned geologist Count de Prorock, who had visited Rockwall 10 years earlier. He confidently declared, "This is certainly the work of man. The fact that the wall turns and makes a square corner leads me to believe it is man-made masonry, because nature does not, as a rule, build corners in this fashion." And this geologist wasn't just some amateur. Prorock believed he had uncovered evidence linking the lost Atlantis to North Africa, and was a member of both the Royal Archaeological Institute and the Royal Geographical Society. But corners weren't the only man-made feature. In 1999, on a show called America Unearthed, the team discovered a pair of metal rings embedded in the wall, about 6 feet from the top. Why were those there? Still, no answers. The wall, as a lot of these findings do, has solstice and equinox alignments, with the top of the wall being a uniform 550 feet above sea level. This quarried stone that some refer it to is now found to be more like cast stone, similar to concrete but stronger and more durable. Really? More durable than our advances? Huh, that's weird. The mortar is a geopolymer made up of 3 different varieties of quartz. And if you've watched my Texas Capitol video, you know that this concoction has a piezoelectric effect, which the wall has been found to have when exposed to low-frequency sound waves. Remember the rings within the wall? Well, they are smelted from nickel, iron, copper, tin, and are seeming to be more and more like power outlets. In the surrounding layers of sediment, we find evidence of marine life, which suggests that this area was either part of an ancient inland sea or completely submerged in water at some point in history. I believe this happened much more recently than the mainstream narrative suggests. Not tens of thousands of years, maybe thousands. Well, that's only one find in the entire state of Texas, Logan. Stop being such a conspiratard. No, never. At least I do some work to show you why I think what I think. Like this. Not far from Rockwall in Milano, Texas, there was another wall, 20 miles long and almost as massive as the Chinese wall, this article says. Let's get the details. This marvelous ruin surpasses in interest all the other wonderful remains hitherto found of the people who once inhabited the whole Mexican plateau and attained a high state of civilization. It passes through all Milano and has a total length of about 20 miles. It is built of solid masonry, 10 to 15 feet high and as many feet thick. Its height and thickness are thus almost as great as the famous Chinese wall on the north of China. The direction is northeast to southwest, which is actually the opposite of the rock wall. Side note. The article keeps going. It is for the most part underground, and this is one of the curious things that puzzled those wise men who are supposed to know all about prehistoric remains. It is undoubtedly very old. One might suppose it to be the sure foundation of a gigantic fortress, which rose above the ground many feet. The towers and other means of defense with which it might have been provided have had time to crumble away in the years that have passed. They go on to give the Aztecs the credit, saying, the Aztecs probably built this wall. Probably. Okay, I'm all in for theories, but how about we give the Aztecs a rest, guys? The article keeps going. They have left some inscriptions on it, but since their language is entirely lost, no scholar can ever hope to decipher them. One covers a space of 8 feet square. They go on to say, there was undoubtedly a populous village or city in the vicinity, for on a high hill near Milano the remains of a mighty temple of worship are found. This was supported by more than 200 lofty pillars. What? Why wasn't this in Texas history? The idols are all curiously marked, it says. Around each pillar, small stones are piled up in circles or squares, and inside each circle, underneath the pillar, there is a center or foundation stone fashioned to represent the Godhead. Near the wall, there are furnaces in which the natives smelted iron. An enormous amount of labor and material must have required for its construction if built on the same gigantic plan as the foundation. Although there were towards 1 million people then living in that vicinity, the work must have extended over a considerable period of time. It is difficult to understand how, but a few thousand could be interested in its construction. Don't you think it's funny that there's always an answer for who the builders were? Like, why isn't this discovery still discussed in Texas history if it were the Aztecs that created them? I mean, a wall being related to the Great Wall of China and a temple with 200 lofty pillars being found in central Texas sure seems like something we should all be researching still. Why are the supposed Aztec findings in Mexico, known by all, discussed, but these in central Texas aren't? Wouldn't that make a case for there being more to this narrative? So, what if the Aztecs had nothing to do with these megalithic structures, or any American Indian for that matter? I'm not saying the American Indians weren't here, I'm just saying that maybe they were survivors of a much more remote civilization that was almost completely erased. When the Americas were turned upside down in the 16th century, the conquerors asked the natives who constructed the great South American walls. They answered, "They were here when our fathers came." Couldn't it be the same for Texas and North America? In my opinion, these discoveries show that 1,000 years ago or less, the world may have been a high-tech wonderland. The technology that we have today would not be needed if we used the Earth's technology that I feel were once used. Since then, civilization after civilization has been dissolved, leaving us with a fragmented narrative that hides the full extent of our past. The groups we labeled to have built these masonry wonders seem so far-fetched, when in the same sentence, they explain how they sacrificed virgins for the gods and built with hammer and chisel. I mean, come on. In Mesoamerica alone, there are 374 Maya sites across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras, including Tikal with 7 massive pyramids, around 100 Aztec sites in central Mexico, and hundreds of Inca sites across Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, Chile, and Argentina. All that advanced construction over the years, but not in Texas? There are 1,500-mile highways on top of the Andes Mountains, but there weren't any reaching as far as North America? In Maya country, there are causeways that are still being discovered running just as long as they are in South America. Oh, but that's not all the discoveries I have on Texas. The list goes on and on with these articles. Not far from Milano in Deanville, Texas, the discovery of ditches extending miles with another wall that was said to have marveled scientists. Here we go. Few people outside of the most learned investigators and archaeologists are aware of the fact that there is much to convince us that in some remote era, a highly civilized race must have existed for centuries in the vast region between the plains of Texas and the mountains of Peru. Farmers are frequently amused at the long lines of heaped earth excavations and barren spots, never once dreaming that these are the imprints on the earth of people who dwelt here and cultivated the soil at a time when our ancestors were naked savages living in alpine caves. To the archaeologist, nothing is more interesting and puzzling than these Texas ruins. At some places, the walls are of dressed stone laid without mortar, with such accuracy as to win the admiration of a modern mason. In almost every instance, the face of the earth for many miles in every direction from the ruins is covered with a network of earthworks. The Deanville ruin is on the top of what believed to be an artificial mountain. If it is the work of human hands, it took countless swarms of people centuries to build it. A stone wall which must have been 30 or 40 feet high and from 4 to 6 feet thick extends across the summit. It is a little more than a mile long. It is a perfect circle and encloses about 40 acres of dressed stone, now almost covered with earth. Great dressed rock of such enormous dimensions that they cannot be removed are often found. One can only conjecture that this was either the residence of a great monarch or the site of some gigantic sacred edifice surrounded by a defensive wall. The earth marks are in parallel lines, 200 or 300 yards apart. The dirt has been thrown from a deep trench to the outside. There is always a great crack in the earth just at the edge of the embankment. Investigation revealed a mass of petrified timber, about 8 inches in diameter and 8 feet long. I concluded that these had been arranged to support the roof of a continuous subterranean gallery, which may have been partitioned, and here the people dwelt. Under such an order of affair, the whole nation lived and slept in line of battle. Okay, not really on the same page as this guy, but when the sentry sounded the alarm, the warriors sprang to the root of the subterranean gallery, and with the great wall of dirt before them, were ready to defy the foe. The nation occupied these long parallel galleries and in daytime cultivated the fields. On every side of these parallel lines, one finds innumerable bastions, looking as if some modern artilleryman had made them only a few years ago. They are in the shapes of a half moon and 15 feet between the horns. They go on to say that a farmer was cultivating a sloping piece of land when he came across a peculiar kind of millet which began to grow. The heads are enormous and contain nearly a handful of oily seeds. Could a race of people who were possibly agriculturalists been here before Babylon was built? They say the earthworks extended to the Brazos River, a distance of 20 miles on the east, and to another stone wall about 20 miles on the west. They spread all over the Yagua country on the south, and with here and there a break can be traced to the valleys of Mexico. I rode my horse in one of these ditches for about 10 miles. It ran over hill and dale, through forest and plain, and was often so deep that I could not see over the embankment. Many times I saw the petrified timbers, and they were always of uniform dimensions. 200 or 300 yards away, another ditch of the same kind ran parallel with the one I was following. At one end, they terminated on the banks of the Brazos, and at the other, on a high hill, where the two lines approached within 10 feet of each other, forming a gateway. This area of Milam in Burleson County is said to have supported human habitation for at least 10,000 years or more. The history within these counties are extremely dense, and I honestly went down a ton of rabbit holes making this video take much longer to produce. Those dang rabbits. A key historical note being that this area is part of the ancient road of the El Camino Real de los Tejas, or in white people terms, the Royal Road to the Tejas. Royal Road. Interesting. Seeing how there was a temple with 200 lofty pillars in Milano and in Burleson another 40-foot high wall, I'd say that's pretty spot on. The history I found says that the hunting and gathering people who had established themselves along the San Gabriel River by 4500 BC were probably ancestors of the Tonkawa Indians. There goes another probably, and of course they needed to label them hunter and gatherers. The Tonkawas were a nomadic people who lived in widely scattered bands, practiced no agriculture, none, no millet by any chance, no, and sometimes traveled hundreds of miles to follow the buffalo. Which brings me to a side tangent. Don't you think it's funny not long ago there were millions of buffalo roaming around, and then due to human extermination as well as sickness, they all vanished? It's almost like something happened to erase these animals. It's kind of like the cane brakes on the Texas Gulf Coast, which in my county of Matagorda used to be so thick the new explorers complained about them slowing their travels. These are said to have been depleted because of overgrazing, altered burning regimes, and land clearing. The layers of earth and other materials built up over time, to me, is a questionable way to date discoveries. It allows the archaeologists to assume they understand exactly what has happened and taken place in that region. That type of dating is called stratigraphy. It's just one of the many ways we of the finders of our past get the dating wrong. The worst is carbon dating, but we will save that for another time. These findings in central Texas really make me ponder. I mean, if these findings were ancient, then wouldn't it be tens and tens and tens of feet below the surface? I know the Deanville and North Texas walls were supposedly 40 feet high, but the layers of sedimentation don't match with the findings. In the Deanville article, when talking about the 40-foot stone wall, the article states, "It is a little more than a mile long, is a perfect circle, and encloses about 40 acres of dressed stone, now almost covered with earth." Almost covered with earth? I'm really starting to believe, as I research this topic more, that it was a relatively recent structure. If it wasn't made recently, then it certainly was much more visible recently, until an event buried it. I found an article that gives some validity to this theory that something big and disastrous happened within the last 400 or 500 years within the Americas. The article takes place within the old Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, which, as you saw, was once a city's name within Burleson County but spelled differently. Tenochtitlan, for those that don't understand, is Mexico City today. In the Scientific American of August 23, 1902, the construction workers were doing some work on the existing building and mentioned that a structure once stood in that spot not long ago. They assumed that the Tikali that once was there would have been destroyed by the invaders, and the stones were probably repurposed and used for other structures around Mexico City. While the workmen were leveling off the central courtyard, they encountered a hard, solid foundation, which proved to be a flight of stone steps going down into the earth. A trench was opened 2 feet below the surface, and the men struck what appeared to be a round, polished rock. It turned out to be a several-ton statue of a tiger with great craftsmanship, as well as later finding another statue of a serpent. The workmen also dug up the corners of an immense wall. Man, our ancestors really liked walls. I bet they were Lincoln Log kids like me. This great wall once enclosed dwellings of 7,000 Aztec priests, with 78 chapels devoted to the worship of their deities. The odd part is that the workers finally reached the end of the stone steps at 13 feet underground. The article reads, "All the objects found are to be preserved in the National Museum, and it is proposed by Captain Diaz to leave the patio with the excavation open, showing remains of the temple. The very interesting question now arises, how is it that the present city is 13 feet above the old one, as shown by excavations?" See, they had no clue an entire Aztec city was buried right beneath their feet. Isn't that wild? How did the discoverers, one of them being the freaking president of Mexico's son, not inherit any knowledge that Mexico City, which they ruled, was built right on top of another city from just 400 or 500 years ago? Supposedly, the invaders didn't destroy all the structures, nor did they reuse the stones to build what we see today. It was in fact buried. But why was it buried? What if Cristobal Colon in 1492, along with the other doomsday opportunists from Europe, were actually racing over here because something had already happened? What if they weren't the cause of mass destruction, but rather the scavengers arriving after the cataclysm? Think about it. Entire civilizations supposedly wiped out in record time by a relatively small group of invaders. Yes, they undoubtedly did kill some people, but what if the real devastation had already been done by Mother Nature? Or what if these European powers, or the proverbial they, orchestrated the disaster themselves? Some researchers like Michelle Gibson have explored this idea. Others like Jason Brashear suggest that cataclysms aren't random but reoccurring events happening on a precise schedule. Researchers like Martin Lidke and Campbell talk about resets, massive upheavals that rewrite history, and yet mainstream narratives refuse to acknowledge these possibilities. Now, I know the last article isn't about Milano, Deanville, Rockwall, or even Texas, but think about it. If Tenochtitlan was buried under 13 feet of debris, wouldn't that event have impacted areas far north and south? Mexico and Texas are practically one giant terrestrial centipede. Yes, that was a human centipede reference. Guys, this is fascinating to me. Our ancestors' cities are right beneath our feet. Doesn't that make you want to grab an excavator and start digging in your own backyard? I wish I knew someone in this part of Texas who would let me dig holes on their property. A literal rabbit hole. So, If my theory is right, if massive sedimentation buried these walls relatively recently, shouldn't there still be visible clues? Articles document these places, but is there physical evidence left to see? Unfortunately, in Rockwall, a modern city was slapped right on top of this megastructure, and just west of the discovery site, a man-made lake, Lake Ray Hubbard, was created. Not a lot of coincidences, folks. But Milano and Deanville, they're out in BFE Central Texas. So what's hiding out there? Well, for starters, just a stone's throw from Milano, there's a town called Temple. Yeah, interesting, huh? Temple. Then there's Heart Mountain, a so-called mountain by Texas standards rising about 600 to 650 feet above sea level. But what really caught my attention is Sugarloaf Mountain, what the Tonkawa called Red Mountain, just 10 miles east of Milano. On one side of the Little River, which connects to the Brazos, you have a continuous plateau, but just beyond the river, flatlands as far as the eye can see. Now, according to the Tonkawa, Sugarloaf Mountain is where the people emerged from the earth. Their creation myth describes a divine wolf flipping a tortoise on its back, revealing a hole in the earth where the first Tonkawa came through. The tortoise then became Red Mountain, a sacred place still represented on the official Tonkawa seal. In recent years, the Tonkawa tribe actually purchased Red Mountain. Don Patterson, a former tribal president, rediscovered its legacy in the 1980s, calling it their Garden of Eden. Their wolf dance ceremony even reenacts the first human emerging from the foot of the mountain. If you've researched indigenous myths, you'll notice a reoccurring theme: civilizations emerging from underground. Whether these are just symbolic stories or records of something more literal is up for debate. But it seems to me that Sugarloaf Mountain was just a temple. It was an entrance. In the counties just west of Milam and Burleson, it is known to be ravished with subterranean passageways. Another clue is I recently came across a book on the history of Milam County at my local library here in Richmond, Texas. Turns out, in the 1600s and 1700s, while Spanish friars were supposedly building elaborate missions across Texas, 3 of them failed in the Milano area, right near where these articles take place. Spanish records referred to this region as the Big Ranch, home to a thriving accumulation of indigenous tribes. By 1840, Noah Smithwick visited the site and found crumbling ruins. Then there's Reverend Gabriel Taus, a former Roman Catholic priest from Cameron, Texas, who had access to Spanish Franciscan records. Based on those, he concluded that one of these missions, San Ildefonso, was likely located at Sugarloaf Mountain. He was prepared to publish his findings, but in the 1930s, right before he could, he was invited to Spain, and no one in Milam County ever heard from him again. Mysterious, right? Ain't it kind of funny that little old Cameron, Texas had a Roman Catholic priest who supposedly had access to the records of the Franciscan order, and was even invited to Spain after his findings about Sugarloaf Mountain? What was the deal there? Were they using him to help uncover the history of Sugarloaf? Was Reverend Taus just that important that Spain needed him? Or was he silenced? What exactly was he about to publish? And what did he discover about Sugarloaf Mountain? Now, let's not forget the Tonkawa creation myth, the one about how they emerged from the overturned turtle. Interestingly, on Sugarloaf's western face, there's a 25-foot cave. Was it an entrance at one time? Could it be? There's often more truth hidden in myths than we realize. Sugarloaf Mountain definitely has a rich and mysterious history that's endless, it seems. Milam County has even attracted treasure seekers for years. One treasure hunter even leased Sugarloaf, drove a bulldozer to the top, and completely scraped off the surface looking for gold. I'm not sure how true this is, but it's been recorded, so I shall record it. Then there's Rockdale, just 9 miles southwest of Milano. This town's name comes from a curious rock formation that once sat at the heart of the city. It's a large, flat, round rock that's now been moved to the new city hall. What's it doing out there in the flat Texas prairies? Could this Rockdale rock have been a part of the structures described in the articles we've been exploring? Seems worth considering. Look at it. But here's the real kicker. Every single discovery we've been discussing here in Texas seems to be aligned perfectly with what are called ley lines, energetic highways that crisscross this realm. If you're not familiar with ley lines, I encourage you again to check out Michelle Gibson's work over at Piercing the Veil of Illusion after this video. She's been collaborating with Chad on deeper discussions, and their research into ley lines is mind-blowing. Now, my take on ley lines is this. These are straight alignments drawn between various historical structures, prehistoric sites, and prominent landmarks. These lines follow geometric patterns called sacred geometry, and where they intersect, they form grids, kind of like the points on our bodies in acupuncture. These ley lines can connect from certain well-known energetic locations we've all discussed endlessly, like the Bermuda Triangle, which interestingly enough also aligns with places like Deanville and Milano. In fact, the ley line running through Milano and Deanville also aligns with the famous Galt site in Williamson County, known for its rich prehistoric artifacts dating back over 15,000 years, supposedly, as well as Granite Mountain in the Hill Country. Although the inclusion of ley lines in these discoveries may appear speculative, research indicates that structures were deliberately placed on these strategic locations in the past. These articles show that there's so much hidden beneath our feet. That hill you drove by today, was it really just a hill? The valleys and dips in the land, are they truly natural? Why is that rock sitting right there in that specific location? Doesn't it look odd and out of place? These are the questions I ask myself every day. Life is so much more exciting when you see the world through a lens of curiosity. It's not about thinking, I have all the answers, there's nothing left to discover. Oh, but there is. The articles I've uncovered are fragments of our past, so why are they buried deep in digital archives, tucked away from the public? These stories should be known by everyone. And here's the thing, I'm not here to hand you all answers. My videos aren't about providing definite facts or conclusions. I'm simply showing you the trails, the clues, and the stories that time has tried to hide. The rest is up to us, together. There's a hidden narrative about our history waiting to be uncovered, and it's our job to piece it together. So, if you have any information or insight on these topics, please send them my way. Let's keep digging, researching, and exploring. The truth is out there, and it's time we find it, piece by piece. Now, with all this information laid out, I want to leave you with one question. Don't you think it's funny? Oh, also guys, get ready for some incredible interviews with people you may or may not know. Things are aligning, and I hope you're a part of it. And thank you all for your interest in these videos. I've truly found my passion, and I couldn't be happier. Love y'all.